Welcome to Triptych.
Three friends having a chat
About three artistic masterpieces.
Making connections for modern life. Welcome to episode 2 of Triptych. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined again by good friends Sophie and Joel. Sophie, where are you and why?
I am sat at the moment in Surrey in my very lovely little art studio at the bottom of my garden.
Sophie, it looks a bit like a shed to me.
How dare you, Mark? It is not a shed. It may be wooden in its setup, but it is an art studio where I come to reflect and think big thoughts. So
was that a bit of a faux pas then?
Yes, not a shed.
Okay, well, I take that completely back. And it's a very fine studio, if I may say so.
Thank you, it is.
Yeah. And Joel, are you in a shed? I mean, a studio?
I'm not in a shed or a studio. I'm in my office at home, where I have air conditioning, which is really important in the climate we have throughout the year.
In Kingston, is it a very hot day today?
Actually, it's not too bad today. We've been having a lot of rain, so the temperature is down a bit.
And when you say a bit, are we talking like half a degree or something?
Well, what are you measuring? I can't even remember. Just Fahrenheit, Celsius.
Centigrade will be fine.
Oh dear, that's the problem.
Are you
probably
Fahrenheit?
edging towards. Well, I grew up with Fahrenheit, so it's hard to shoot. We were probably edging towards 30, I think.
Oh,
wow,
gosh.
that's hot.
Wow. Okay, so that's really hot.
Okay.
Well,
we
yeah,
don't want to know what's going on
better
here.
than it's been.
Wow.
Yeah, the summer is not ending here.
It's definitely ended here.
Yeah, so lots of rain here. It's grey and overcast, but we're not miserable because we're recording an episode of Triptych, which is just excellent news. But while we're thinking of sort of grey and miserable, I want to ask you both what sort of artistic things you turn to if you're feeling a bit agitated and you need, I don't know, to sort of calm yourself down a bit and get back on track. Sophie, where do you turn?
Well, I think if I'm feeling particularly agitated and I really need to kind of, I don't know, purge those emotions, have a bit of kind of catharsis going on, I'll probably write a bit of spoken word poetry. It's just kind of, I really get all the emotion out. Some of it may not be suitable for public consumption, but nevertheless, just putting things into kind of stanzas, rhyming couplets and all that kind of stuff, playing around with words, it really helps me just to kind of get the emotion out onto paper.
Do you record it and listen back, or would that be excruciating?
No, sometimes I do record them. If I think they're kind of worthy of it, I will record them and send them to trusted friends.
So I've never received one of those, actually.
No, absolutely not.
Anyway, well, let's move on from that. But that sounds excellent, Sophie. I'm sure that's very helpful. Joel, how about you?
Well, I think if I'm at that place where I'm kind of in that emotional, just not. Sometimes music will help me. And usually returning to familiar places musically. I think part of it is you kind of know the emotional landscape of the music you've listened to a lot. So that helps me, I think, to disconnect a bit from my own agitation and just enter a different emotional space, but one that's predictable in a certain sense. So I like if I'm particularly sad, for example, I'll probably listen to some Aqualung. Because I think he expresses those emotions so well. But again, the disconnection from my own and experiencing somebody else's expression can help me, can soothe me, I find.
Yeah.
It doesn't sort of drive you deeper, but it's a way of getting it out, perhaps.
At times I've worried if it would drive me deeper, but it actually doesn't. I think I'm probably able to be a little bit more clinical with somebody else's expression of emotion than my own, and not just absorb it, but say, I do feel a bit like that, but I'm not going there with you, kind of thing.
Interesting. That's great. For me, I think if I had some of Sophie's spoken word poetry, I think I would probably turn to that, but I don't have any, so that's really not very helpful.
Sad times.
I know, but it's okay. I've got various other means for solving the problem. But for me, there'd be lots of different music, but and often it'd be choral music, just because I sang in choirs for years and years. But visually, I would turn to one of the painters I first latched onto, who's quite a young guy. Sort of the landscapes by Claude Lorraine. He does these sort of vast landscape vistas, but often with a little classical motif or theme. So there might be something from Homer or Virgil or one of the sort of metamorphosis stories from Ovid or whatever. So they'll just have some tiny little figures in one corner, but you're taken up with this vast landscape, often with a beautiful sunrise or sunset. He was very influential on Turner, apart from anything else, who's one of the real greats. But there is just something profoundly moving, but also engrossing about looking at some of those. And so I find, actually, when I have the presence of mind to remember this, that can be a really helpful thing to do. So there we are. None of us are now agitated, having just thought about those things, and we can move on to thinking about our masterpieces. Great. So our first masterpiece in this episode is the song "What Was I Made For" by Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas O'Connell, and they made it for the 2023 movie Barbie, which I have to say was one of the most fun experiences I've had in a cinema for a long time. I thought our daughter said that we all had to go and watch this, and she actually insisted on taking us there to make sure we did.
Oh wow!
And I think she was right to do so. We had a great time. Weirdly, I don't think I was particularly conscious of the song at the time seeing the movie, but obviously had heard about it, and heard it properly afterwards. And it actually won an Oscar for soundtrack, so for the best song for a movie at that year's Oscars in 2023. And I can really see why. But it's deceptive. It's very, very simple and minimal. It's quite spare. Lyrically, it's very introspective. It's not complicated in terms of vocabulary or anything like that. But it's really touching. And Billie Eilish has a particular genius, I think, for crafting these very personal, very intimate, very private songs. And there's a real feel of a lot of her stuff that, this was created in the bedroom at home, sort of garage band type feel. And obviously she and her brother are remarkably talented and gifted musicians. But there's a directness that comes from just the way they've made these their songs. And that comes across in this particular track. And I suppose there's a fascinating contrast with, the whole idea of Barbie, which is all about the superficial fabrication, the sort of fabricated world, and everything's pink and glitzy and sparkly, but it's all very unreal. And the whole joke of the song being about, what is this doll made for? And yet it really gets under the skin. So I don't know how you two felt about it. Did you like the song already? Joel, what did you think?
I'm one of the few people in the world who had not and still have not watched Barbie.
It's okay.
I tend to do that sort of thing. And it's not that I wouldn't watch it either. I think we missed the moment and I just haven't gone back to review it yet. But yes, certainly listening to the song, it was haunting. It was vulnerable. Even without watching the film, I could kind of see how this kind of lyric kind of superimposed on that type of reality is an exercise in contrast. Yet feels like this exercise of reaching for meaning, which I think was just one of the subtexts there. Well, really the text on the surface of the film, as far as I understand it. And again, I think such a contemporary theme, even from an individualistic perspective, just kind of that reaching for meaning. But yeah, as a songwriter, the lyric was it's so concise yet so. I think I don't feel like she wasted words at all there.
Not at all.
Everything was advancing the idea and exploring the space so well. Yes, I think the vulnerability is what struck me, especially you know these days. I guess I access a lot of music through my children now. You realize you have the catalog in the back of your head of the songs you've listened to, and there's all kinds of new stuff out there that you're accessing. I'm accessing through my children. And it's interesting because I haven't listened to a lot of Billie Eilish. But yeah, I didn't expect that sort of vulnerability.
Sophie, what about you?
Yeah, no, I love the song. It is so haunting and so sparse. I don't know if you saw her perform it live with her brother at the Oscars. If you can see it on YouTube, I definitely advise, because it was just her brother and the piano. So very, very kind of minimal. But the atmosphere of the whole room, it just like everybody, it was like one of those absolutely still moments. And in like arenas like the Oscars, that doesn't happen often. It's all about the big jazz hands, showbiz, the laughs. And it just felt like a real moment where people got to reflect.
I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for.
And I thought, it fits in obviously with the Barbie theme, but then I think it's good because it's ostensibly about Barbie and the film. And that helps people, I think, feel safe because that's kind of what it's about. But we all know that's not really what it's about. It's about us. But we can kind of explore that at a safe distance, I think. I think possibly that's what helps people connect to it who aren't used to being perhaps so introspective about their lives. And it's looking at the fact that, what if all the things that we're told to value and covet and to want, which are going to make our lives perfect and incredible and fulfilling, what if they don't equal purpose? What if we get those things and it's still something is missing? What are we made for? And that's just such a key human thing at the base of everybody. Everybody asks that question. What am I here for? What am I made for? What is this all about? But I think because it's written for Barbie, we can just look at it and kind of go, oh, that's about that, but explore it safely.
I think that's such a helpful point, Sophie, because actually, in a way, Barbie's doing exactly the same thing as a movie because it's all about, the patriarchy, but also about women and what women have experienced and endured. But it's done in a very subversive, very tongue-in-cheek and sort of winking way. You're swept up in that, but it makes you ask serious questions without getting too heavy at all. I think this song sort of enters into that, but it is. There's not much winking or wry humor here. This is now actually at the end of the movie with the titles running. This is now we're getting to the heart of this. So what is this all about when we think about ourselves? Because you can't leave it just with Barbie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joel, did you want to comment on that?
No, I think, Sophie, I think you accessed it so well just in terms of the permission it gives us to ask questions. I mean, even ask questions that aren't popular these days in terms of Just, with Barbie, the reality of creation is obvious. We aren't necessarily willing to admit that openly, yet there is this quest for meaning. And it seems that in some ways, the idea of being made and the idea of meaning are connected, And so I think kind of being given permission to ask that question and have that conversation is a very powerful thing. And then even connecting at the end of the song with the idea of happiness. Because happiness now becomes a meaningful thing. And it's like, all right, but why should happiness be a meaningful thing? But if it is something we were made for, then it is a meaningful thing.
I mean, there's a certainty about the very question, isn't there? That we were made for something. So that's the starting place. So what is it? There's no sense of, okay, so was I made or am I just an accident? And, your point about Barbie, Joel, is it spot on. Of course, she's completely made to make Mattel toys money or whatever. But it really forces us to face that question.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. I think it does kind of put us in the category of a created being in a way that people can easily access and just be like, yes, that's me. I'm a creation as much as Barbie's a creation. So I just think it helps people to kind of tap into the whole idea of who we are as people and who we are and who has actually given us a purpose. Because if we're created, there is a creator, So, and that should give us the idea of who we are. We can only know that if we have an idea about the purpose we were made for. So I just think it's a really smart way to access that.
I think I don't know if it's yeah, sorry. I was saying, I don't know if it's because of my not approaching it from the angle of the movie and not being familiar with it. But like, I couldn't help but compare it with Radiohead's Fake Plastic Trees and just, just some of the ideas there, just exploring existence, exploring meaning again. And just, their idea, it wears me out. It's kind of, it feels like it's a mirror image of the reaching that's happening in this question,
Brilliant. That's a great point. I think we want to come back to some of these things when we sort of tie things together. But it struck me that what is interesting is that if, as it seems the case, this song assumes our being created, then it's pretty perplexing that the song is full of doubt and sadness and just a gentle fear about what this is all leading to. And that's kind of incongruous with having a created purpose. And maybe that's what underlies a lot of the melancholy here. But we can come back to that when we've looked at our other two masterpieces in a moment.
Okay, so my masterpiece that I'm bringing to the table today is a painting by Francisco de Zurbaran. Did I say that correctly, Mark? I did. I'm giving a thumbs up.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So he was a Spanish Baroque painter. So we're talking 1600s. He was known as the Spanish Caravaggio, which kind of feels harsh that he's known as the Spanish someone else, who was a very famous earlier painter, slightly earlier anyway, who was Italian, very well known for his religious tableaus. And it's extremely similar style. Now, it's not certain if Zurbarán ever actually saw Caravaggio's work or whether they just happened to have that same style, which was kind of that intense realism, but a very strong use of light and dark, which we'll get into. So this particular painting that we're looking at, it has a few names. It's kind of known by different things, but as I give you the titles, you'll see very clearly what the painting is of. So the titles can be Crucified Christ with a Painter, or St. Luke painting the crucifixion, or Crucifixion and Painter, self-portrait of the artist as St. Luke. So you get there clearly. This is a painting of Christ on the cross being witnessed by St. Luke, who we think is possibly, it's supposed to be a self-portrait of the artist Zurbarán there. So it was painted about 1650, and it's oil on canvas, and it hangs in the Museo del Prado in Spain. So let's talk about the style of it. So the first thing I noticed is that what we're looking at is a very white Jesus on the cross. And I just wanted to mention that, because for a Jesus who was born in the Middle East, he's very pale. Although that does work with this painting style that he's going from. So we've got a painting of Jesus on the cross, and then we have Saint Luke, or Zurbaran himself, gazing up adoringly, holding, it's like a paint palette and brushes. You can see kind of colours on the palette, like he's about to start painting. The style of it uses a technical term known as chiaroscuro. Did I say that nicely? I think that was beautiful.
It was.
And that is a technical that's a technical term for like dramatic lighting. It's the high contrast light and shadow, which is not unlike the Edward Hopper painting we looked at last time, even though obviously that's, years and hundreds of years apart and a different style. We're still looking at this high contrast light and shadow. So we have the backdrop, which is really dark and murky. It's a bit like Rembrandt, who's of the time as well. And then this kind of shaft of light falls across the painting. So it kind of highlights the profile of Jesus' body on the cross, and then the profile of the painter's face gazing up. So it's like a really stark relief. We've got this empty background and then highlighted faces and bodies. That's also known as tenebrism. So, So I think it's interesting. Apparently Zurbarán actually liked to do this chiaroscuro style with the light and dark, because he wasn't great at painting backgrounds, which seems a harsh thing to be noted by the art historians, but this is what they say, is that he wasn't great at doing perspective and doing the kind of the backdrops or interiors. So this style of chiaroscuro with the murky backgrounds and then like the brightness of the faces or profile of the bodies suited him. So according to one art historian, he describes it as Zurbarán succeeded in making a grace of his clumsiness, which I thought was kind of a sweet way to insult him.
Get the claws out.
Yeah, it was kind of like an insult and compliment all in one.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, as an artist, and I think for any creative person listening to that, I think there's some kind of greatness in that, in the fact that Zurbarán knew what worked for him and really leaned into it. And I'm like, that's a great, I mean, obviously Zurbarán, looking at this painting, I mean, he has far more technical skill than I could ever begin to dream of. I mean, the realism of it is just incredible. Looking at Jesus on the cross, it's incredible. But yeah, he has this murky background, which helps. It's quite a tender painting, because I think often with these kind of crucifixion type religious paintings, they tend to be kind of like big drama with like weeping women and people lying around distraught. Whereas this is just kind of quiet. It's just Jesus at the point of death. And then the painter gazing up at Jesus, and he looks kind of adoring but also sad, and it's a really intimate moment captured. It's you kind of wonder what he's thinking. He kind of holds his hand to his heart, almost like he's feeling sorrow or mourning, but yeah, also this adoration. And I find it fascinating that he has his art implements with him. Like, why is that? That's a curious question. Like, was Luke known for painting? I mean, he was known as a doctor. So is that just supposed to help us go, well, that's definitely Zurbarán the painter, not Luke here? So is that just kind of an obvious self-portrait, or is he trying to tell us something? Yeah, it's really interesting. So what do you reckon? What do you reckon, guys? What did you think?
Yeah, I think this surprising thing, as you just hit at the end there, is the artist himself there with the palette. I think, again, as an outsider coming in, I'm like, why Saint Luke? Because I think if I remember my history, Luke wasn't there. So why is he chosen kind of Saint Luke painting the crucifixion? Right. And I wondered if he was kind of riffing on Luke's work of painting with words, which required him to kind of gaze at Jesus in a certain way and try to capture Jesus for his audience. I think just again the attention to detail in the painting of Jesus is fascinating to look at, and then the effect of the lighting also, just that kind of hard lighting against the side of Jesus's body, and then as you pointed out, just the way the Luke / the painter is looking up, kind of hand on heart, clearly very affected by what he's seeing, and maybe needing to be affected in order to paint it effectively.
Yeah, there's a lot of big emotion in his eyes. What do you reckon, Mark? How do you view it?
I think, yes, that he's placing himself in the scene. If it is true to say that it's a self-portrait, and I've always assumed it was, he is placing himself within the gospel story, St. Luke's story. And there's a sense in which, the gesture of his right hand as he's looking up, he's holding the palette in his left hand, but the gesture seems to hint, at least, a sense of ownership about what's going on in the scene, maybe a recognition of his own sinfulness that was what placed Christ on the cross in the first place. So very much participating in the story. And you find that is something that artists and musicians and co do quite a lot. Bach does it in his Passions, and there are, he will weave into the music little gestures or codes that reflect his own discipleship. He might even put his musical initials, BACH, into the music to say, I'm part of this too. Yeah. I think Zurbaran seems to be doing that and saying, look, this is my story. I put him there, but also I gain from this. So hence the sort of look of devotion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I quite enjoy the piece in terms of it's not like a big religious tableau with loads of people. It's very much putting the artist there because we approach Christ as individuals. There's a personal relationship that is for us to have, and we can't access that apart from ourselves approaching and gazing and encountering, which I think is, really stunning within that. You can just really, the ownership of it, of the personal, which I think is beautiful. And I guess if this is a self-portrait as well, he's showing that with the painting, like his life's work is to paint. And he's showing here that what better to do with his life's work at this moment than to capture the essence of what is happening with his saviour. That's kind of what I gathered from it anyway. I just thought that was a really beautiful thing.
And I think it's just interesting that, especially if you think of it as a self-portrait, he's in the picture, but he's not the focal point in a certain way, Yeah. You're kind of seeing what he is looking at. And so his gaze draws you to Jesus, which is fascinating. Just, I've never thought about that effect and the way he's done that very well in this painting. But you're seeing him, but you're also looking at what he's looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. His eyes kind of draw you upwards to look at Christ yourself. And I noted that I think it feels like painting Inception in the sense that it's a painter.
As in Chris Nolan's Inception.
Yes. We've got a painter at the cross thinking, I'm going to paint a picture of this, but it's the actual thing itself is a painting of a picture with somebody thinking, I'm going to paint a picture of Christ, which will be used for, it just kind of goes on and on. It goes back and back.
A painting within a painting within a painting.
Oh.
Exactly.
That's great.
So my masterpiece is, again, television. But I'm going to grow beyond television by episode 3, I'm told. I'm looking forward to seeing how I develop. But this time it's... Say again, Mark?
We're on tenterhooks.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we all are going to be just surprised by how this goes. But I want to talk about Andor, which was a Disney Plus series from 2022. Written by Tony Gilroy. It was So this is long form television now. It's 12 episodes. The lead character, Cassian Andor, is a character from the film Rogue One, which, again, we're not even going to try to get into the complexities of the Star Wars timeline to that extent. But Rogue One was the kind of prequel to which one was it again? Yeah, before the original, A New Hope, which became episode 4 eventually, confusing all of us who saw it as the first thing. But anyway, that's why we don't get into the Star Wars timeline. I'll leave that to my son.
You just did, Joel.
Spent...
You just got into it.
I'm sorry. It's hard to it's hard to resist. My son has spent a lot of time on this, just kind of researching everything, and is on all the wikis and that sort of thing. Like I'm too old for that. I can't keep up.
Too mature.
Well, no, let's not go there. Let's not try that.
Anyway, you were saying, Joel. Keep going.
Yes. So Andor is on one hand, it's an origin story for this particular character from Rogue One. On the other hand, it's showing just the few years leading up to the story in A New Hope, and the kind of how the rebellion kind of begun and gained momentum just in the shadow of the Empire. No, a lot of even people who are fans of the Star Wars universe have just been their patience has been taxed by some of the offerings over the last few years. So Andor was such a pleasant surprise. I think part of what makes it work so well is they weren't trying to retell the story of well-known characters. They kind of were going behind the scenes to, the guy who'd become, pilot number 2, in one of the films. All of a sudden, you're fleshing out a character for him and a story for him. And I think the way the universe has been constructed leaves a lot of room for that. So I really feel like it's excellent long-form episodic storytelling. It's fascinating because it's the Star Wars universe, but there are no lightsabers and the Force isn't really playing a big role in all of this, which means you get into people.
Yeah, that was the best thing. There's no Force.
Yeah, so, you'd think that would be the highlight of everything, but really the people are the highlight of this universe. It's gorgeously shot. It's shot in very murky tones, and the story itself is very murky. It's very political. Morally, it's just, it's this murky space where even the good guys aren't really that good. In contrast to A New Hope, where it's this kind of light against darkness, good against evil in these big broad strokes. This is now all of the detail of, oh, wait a minute, this is not so clean, is it? These good guys are really messy. Yet you see that it's like, you see that there's an evil much greater than them that's much more dangerous. But it's, I think for Andor's story himself, it's just this journey from him being a loner to a leader, him being a very self-interested character who is just trying to secure for himself and his mother and really wants to find a way to escape the misery of his life by getting a lot of money and running away to somewhere where he's not feeling the oppression of the universe. But then he keeps getting sucked into these, or is gradually more and more sucked into something which is much bigger than him, which is going to require more of him than he's prepared to give. And so you're watching that journey. Then at the same time, there are story threads with many other characters. But because it's long-form TV, you actually get to know the characters and to understand them and to feel their motivations and to feel compassion even for characters on the side of the Empire, and just see their own suffering and how they're trying to find their place in this world and what's driving them to either heroic or to tragic actions. So, yeah, Sophie, I know we've gotten you into this, so tell us what that's been like.
Yeah, well, you got me into it. I mean, I am a Star Wars fan, but like you said, my patience had been severely taxed. So by the time we got through Boba Fett and then Obi-Wan Kenobi, I watched maybe 3 episodes and I was like, I'm out. I can't. This is just too much. So I had heard, I mean, I'm a big fan of Rogue One. I think that's possibly the best one. Controversially, I just think it's just brilliant. So to revisit a character from there, I was like, well, already you're giving me hope. So yeah, it was incredible. And it's interesting because you said that, working with unknown characters rather than well-known characters works. But I think even like the legend, the story of Boba Fett, he wasn't well known, and that just did not work.
True, you're right. Yeah, so you still can mess that up.
Yeah, you can still mess it up. But it's like Andor, it really works. I enjoy the gloominess, the murkiness of both the colours and also, like you said, the political landscape. This kind of the slow realization that he has of his purpose. Now, obviously, I've only got to episode 10 of 12, so I've got a fair idea where we're heading, but you can't quite give me all the spoilers. But he has a slow realization of his purpose and what he's willing to die for. And it really does show incredibly well, I think, that with, war, with totalitarianism, in the battle against that, there are really no winners, that it is messy. There is, bad things are done by both sides, and it is for fighting a greater evil. But gosh, it's messy and it's murky and it's morally very ambiguous. And, even with Andor, who's our kind of hero type character, he does some really questionable things and decisions where you're like, oh, I just can't believe you just did that. What are you thinking? So but I like that because it feels just complex, like we are as humans. So I thought it was really good, complex characterization. And same for the women in it as well, which I really appreciated. They're not just like sexy space girls. It's like they're really, it's complex characters doing, interesting things with their own motivations. And so I just thought, as a world building exercise, it's brilliant. And it's not action packed, but that's good, because when you get to the actions, it feels worth it. You feel invested into why they're behaving this way. So it's way more investing than having action every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I loved it.
Those are great observations. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, well, I was precisely the right age when A New Hope came out in 1977. And I saw it in the cinema more than once. I can't remember exactly, but my parents took me more than once. And so it was absolutely part of my DNA growing up. But as the movies came out, I got increasingly disenchanted.
Yes, amen.
So The Empire Strikes Back is the tops for me in terms of movies.
Yeah.
I liked Rogue One. I maybe I need to think about that one again a bit more. But and I've tried some of the TV stuff. I've not tried any of the cartoon stuff. I just, life's too short. But I just was utterly hooked on Andor and can't wait for season 2. I just read something the other day that Diego Luna had said that season 2 ends just moments before the beginning of Rogue One. So there's a nice package and trajectory there that they're not going to just string this out indefinitely, which is just great. So they know where this is going. And you're right. I think the murkiness, it is curious, isn't it? I mean, obviously there's a hint of that murk because in A New Hope, in the first Star Wars movie that came out, there is that line, a lot of lives were lost to get us these battle plans of their Star.
Right,
whatever.
yeah.
And so that's what Rogue One is filling in. And that there's a darkness there, but it's not dwelt on at all in the movie. But it's about the sacrifices, and there's that amazing speech. I think, were you saying when we were chatting earlier, Joel, that, a lot of the YouTube clips are monologues, and there's that amazing speech that Stellan Skarsgård gives as the guy who hires Cassian. He's talking about the sacrifices he's made for the cause, and it is blood-curdling. And, how amazing to have... Well, the cast is an amazing cast. Lots of really great actors. But what I think his little spiel there leaves you sort of... stops you in a tracks. It's astonishing. And that, I think, there's a depth and an edge to this that is really surprising and even shocking. So I just loved it. I love that edginess.
What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy. to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
I also like how you feel empathy in some respects, or maybe if not direct empathy, understanding for motivation for some of the characters in the Empire. You know,
Yeah,
they're not just they're not just charging around, go and kill them all. You can see even within the structure of the Empire, they're kind of desperate people trying to kind of get a foot to not have hopeless lives. You can see they're desperate. They want a purpose, a higher purpose to live. And like one of the younger guys in it who gets sacked briefly for bringing too much attention to Cassian early on, and he wasn't supposed to in the timeline of the Empire. He finds it desperate that he's kind of put in a desk job for a while, just like a meaningless cog in the machine. And he's desperate to go back to what he thinks is his purpose, which is, you know, finding the rebels. So I just think it's really interesting. You have great empathy because we kind of know instinctively as humans what it is to feel that we're not doing what we were made to do, or like we're not, you know, I love that kind of, you understood them. Even if you don't like them, you're like, I know why you're doing that.
Right. Yeah. And it's such a contrast to the kind of stormtrooper trope, the kind of faceless, nameless evil, where no, you're seeing the people and you're understanding the people. And as you say, you do feel a level of empathy, maybe not for them, but just like, oh, wow. Yeah. I see what's happening to you. I see what's driving you. And I think that's a part of the brilliance of it. I think especially in our world, in with the nature of politics now, and just how, you know, transparent isn't quite the word, but, you know, you get so much more news now and so many more perspectives on everything that's going on in the world. And you feel the complexity of the world you're living in a different way than even when I was growing up. When I was growing up, the other side of the world felt far away, but now it just feels like, just another news cycle. And I'm getting a sense of what's happening. And you realize that conflict, it just is horrible for everyone. It takes its toll on every side. And yes, you might feel, okay, there is good and there's evil here, but it's not clean. It's very messy. And a lot of people are getting hurt because of the kind of conflict that you see on the screen here. And it feels like a good mirror for the world we live in.
It reminds me of that classic Mitchell and Webb sketch where they're playing these Nazi officers and they suddenly realize that they might be the baddies.
Are we the baddies?
Are we the baddies? You know, the skull and crossbones on their caps gives it away. But I think that's important because actually a lot of people watching Star Wars immediately assume that their political cause or side corresponds to the rebels. But actually, Andor, I think, just not completely, but it just toys with that a little bit and say, okay, is it as straightforward as that?
Yeah.
And as a very brief aside, I love the fact that the troopers in this can actually hit stuff when they shoot. Because in the original films,
that's true.
The original films, they never hit a thing. You know, they'd be firing, no one gets killed. Whereas this, people get killed.
So presumably they can actually look out of their helmets.
Yes. Yeah.
A quick recap then. So I started off with Billie Eilish's song, What Am I Made For? And that leaves us with some fascinating questions about being created, but how does that fit with the sense of sadness and doubt and confusion? So that's something we might want to pick up.
My masterpiece was the painting of the Crucifixion and Painter by Francisco de Zurbarán. And I think this is about the individual approaching Christ. We have like a solitary person looking at Christ on the cross and the kind of emotions that are going through his face as he approaches that. It's kind of like the personal ownership of who are we to Christ.
And my masterpiece was Andor, the TV series. And I think, it pushes us into questions of what does it take to kind of move a self-absorbed person to see a world and a life that's bigger than them and give them a goal that's bigger than their own happiness?
That's a great question. Why don't we start with that one? So, are there any ways in which that journey, that question, relate to the other two? You can certainly see that in Andor. What about the song and the painting?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if I can jump in, the
Yeah,
song,
go for it.
the song is the most solitary of the three pieces in a fascinating way. It's very introspective, but it's almost stuck in introspection. And so there's a way in which there's very little light that comes in because it's stuck inside the self. And I think that contrasts with the painting where you recognize that the artist is now starting to see themselves by looking at another and to recognize things about themselves by looking at another. And in this case, the other is Jesus, which is such a significant thing. Yes, I'd throw that in and then you guys can grab it and run with it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with like that's how the painting we're seeing a sorrow, a kind of almost a slight dejectedness, a wandering in the painter's eyes, but it's looking at an object, is looking at somebody greater, and that is missing, I think, from the song. They're pondering who they are and how they feel and how they fit in. What is their purpose? But there's nothing concrete is really rich. It really reached. It's left hanging, and it's left for the listener to kind of ponder that themselves. And then you see similar emotions then in the painting. This kind of, who am I? What's my purpose? I mean, we have this painter literally with his painting equipment at the cross. So he's got an idea of who he is, what he's created to do. But you do see this sadness in his eyes and a kind of a heartfelt that somehow I'm connected to this. I'm somehow part responsible for what is happening here with Jesus on the cross. And how does that affect me? How does that relate to me? So, yeah, he started that the person is understanding something of a greater purpose and a greater reason of why they might be there. And then that connects directly to Andor, where it's this slow realization of who he is and what he's supposed to do.
I had a slightly naughty thought with the painting, which is probably not very helpful at all. But sometimes my brain kind of automatically gives little captions to things. And,
Oh dear.
It's not very helpful, but I kind of see in the painter a little bubble above of him going, "What? Moi?" But that's not very helpful at all. So I think that there is genuinely a questioning about how he fits with that story. And which implicitly asks the viewer the same question: how do we fit, or do we fit with this story? In fact, this story of the crucified Christ, as I think Sophie was saying before, is painted very starkly, and his body is very emaciated, but it's doesn't miss out much in terms of the horror and the agony of this. But he is saying, is this your story too? And in which case, what is your part in it? So there's a question for the viewer, which is quite challenging. But then I guess that fits with the fact that this is part of the Counter-Reformation. And they had a lot of paintings in the Counter-Reformation, particularly in Spain, of crucifixions and gory, bloody martyrdoms. And it gets a bit much, but this is one of the few I find that I can take because of what's going on in it. But that questioning of the audience is quite intriguing. You don't get that explicitly in the others.
No, that's true.
Yeah, and I think that thread that runs through all three masterpieces, that kind of search for meaning, is interesting to trace throughout, because if Zurbarán is right, meaning is going to be found looking outside yourself, and not simply the introspection. There's a sense of there's an introspection going on. His posture shows that he's thinking about himself in some ways, but he's looking away from himself And then you see in Cassian Andor's journey how it's situations outside himself with people he loves that pulls him out of his own self-absorption, and just this direction where I'm just trying to get this for myself, and that's all I care about. And recognizing, no, actually, others matter to me too. And when I recognize their suffering, it starts to focus me on a goal that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
So
that's
Sophie,
interesting. I think that's interesting because with the Billie Eilish song, it's very much about the individual, and I think it's important that as individuals we kind of think about who we are, but it's very much the kind of individualistic self-actualization. And it's all about, if I find my purpose, my goal, then that's it. But as you kind of get more with Andor and with this painting, like the purpose in life is really important, but it's kind of being drawn out of them by others, and it's adding to a wider picture. So it's not just about finding like purpose for themselves, but it actually brings something to others and becomes part of a wider picture, which I think is missing from the Billie Eilish song.
So is there no hope in Billie or Barbie? Billie and Barbie?
Well, I think she's doing a really good job of getting people to ask those questions in the first place, because you need to start those questions. And some of us we can live on the surface of our lives so easily. So to start to delve and ask, well, who am I? What is my purpose? That starts that journey, I think, which is crucial. If you're going to start then kind of understanding, and how does that relate to others around me, and who is Jesus in this, and all of those kind of aspects.
Yeah, and I think the reflection on the world she's in has led to the questions, which I think is a really good thing, So yeah, they're good questions, but it doesn't feel like, and again, it's one song. You're not trying to do everything in one song, but there's no obvious direction for answers at the end of the song. I think there is some hopefulness of happiness, but there's no obvious direction. So where do we go from here in finding answers to this question? And I think that implies that in reality, those answers aren't found through that type of introspection.
Although I think I push back a little bit on that, because actually,
please
go back to the question, what was I made for? That is actually different from the sort of classic caricature of, the modern contemporary teenager or whatever, and it's just all about introversion and self-creation. It's not, what do I want? She's not singing.
True.
How can I make my life better? It's actually saying, no, how do I find where I fit in this bigger picture?
Right.
So I think there's a bit more, not optimism isn't the word, and it's not being positive, but it's more constructive, I think. Because if you're asking, what am I made for? Then you have to engage with some questions outside yourself, even if so far it's been internal, emotional, weather.
Yeah, no, that's good. That I agree. I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, I do think you're right. It is a bigger question than just what do I want. You are reaching for something beyond kind of self-knowledge.
Do you think this relates to people in Jamaica? Because it certainly does in Britain. I think Sophie would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are just as affected by that kind of by modern Western mindset as anybody else. I think you have a little less time for that when you feel like you're struggling a bit more to make ends meet. But there still is this direction that says I want resources so that I can pursue my own satisfaction, my own desires.
Is the sense of kids being told they can be anything they want to be if they just put their mind to it and effort? Is that part of the sort of the ether, as it were?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it takes on an even greater urgency when you seeing people who need to rise out of poverty, because now it becomes that kind of determination to succeed, that kind of hey, on one hand, you're in a world with great limits, but in another hand, you want to have a mindset that is going to help you to rise above all those limits. So yeah, it's very much a part of what
in a
you
way,
hear.
the stakes are much higher.
Yeah, because if you don't become something, you're going to be in trouble. So you need it even more than I think in other settings where, hey, you could just end up just working in a convenience store if you decide not to pursue some great goal in life.
Were you saying something, Sophie?
I wasn't, no, but I think all three of them, all three of them are about the search for meaning and about our purpose. What were we made for?
Is there a difference between meaning and purpose here?
I think quite possibly. I mean, I think you were kind of hinting at it when you were pushing back at the idea of like self-actualization, because that's a little different in terms of goals to kind of the actual root question, what was I made for? But they are connected, but they're not the same. But I think you're not going to necessarily understand what was I made for just by looking at yourself and what you want to do. I think, those are routes you have to explore, and it's necessary to be a self-aware person and for growth. But I don't think you're going to get to the crux of what was I made for without looking outside somewhere. Is my thoughts anyway.
And so Cassian Andor has to define that in terms of some big cosmic battle going on. Zurbaran, how does Zurbaran do it?
Well, Zurbarán he's entered that intimate space of beholding a savior, feeling like somehow the death of this man is connected to him in some way. You see there's sorrow on his face, like, I'm sorry that this is happening. I feel responsible. This is linked to me and what I'm doing. So you can see that kind of on his face, that he's trying to fathom what connection does this man's death have with what I was created to do, which is paint. That's what I think.
Joel, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I think, just that whole space where we're bouncing around the notion of meaning and the individual and this idea of looking out yourself and then connections with communities and the suffering of others. I think there's a lot there that can help us to just think through what was I made for. And just, I think meaning is and purpose often come to us. Well, they seem to come to us from outside of ourselves based on our situation and circumstances and the other lives we're connected to. So I think there's there's a thread there that runs through everything that kind of pulls us out of ourselves to look for a greater significance than the self.
Wonderful. Well, friends, I think that's been a lot of fun. It's taken us out of ourselves and we've had to think about other things. And that's got to be a good thing. And I think that's kind of the moral of the story from today, isn't it? So that's a good note on which to end. And we should do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Absolutely.
Is it goodbye from you?
It's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
You want to try that again? Joel first?
Okay.
Well, I think that's goodbye from me then.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Fabulous.
That was Triptych, hosted by me, Mark Mennell, with Joel Bain in Jamaica and Sophie Kiddingley in the UK, with tech and editorial expertise from Owen Feetham. Visit our website at triptychpod.com, that is triptychpod.com, for episode show notes, background information and various links. Please do get in touch with any questions, comments and even suggestions for future episodes. And if you've enjoyed this, please do share it around and rate us wherever you get your podcasts.